Let's heat up a cold December night.
Welcome to Question Time, which comes tonight from Wakefield. And with us here tonight, the Conservative leader in Scotland, Ruth Davidson, Labour's former Home Secretary, Alan Johnson, the Daily Telegraph columnist and leader writer, Tim Stanley, the columnist and writer on The New Statesman, Laurie Penny, and the businessman who chairs Leave Means Leave, which warns against any watering down of Brexit, Richard Tice. Thanks very much. As ever, you can join in this debate, of course, from home, Facebook, Twitter, or text 83981. Our first question is from Carl Wilshire, please. Mr.
With
Wilshire.
EU net migration at record high, is it now time to accept that to gain control, we must leave the single market?
EU net migration at a record high, as was announced today. Time to leave the single market. Alan Johnson.
Well, it is extraordinary. These are the highest figures ever. And during the EU referendum campaign, on May the 26th, the Office of National Statistics published the net migration figures, which was 333,000. It's the latest quarter. It's now 335,000. And you could feel the argument slipping away from the Remain side. And I do think it was the biggest single reason why people voted to leave. And I think if we ignore that and we try and pretend that somehow unlimited migration is somehow progressive, then we run a serious risk of losing touch as politicians. So I think it is an issue. I think that people, when they're asked about their attitude towards individual migrants, actual people, it is remarkably positive. But then when you ask them about net migration, they worry about that. They worried in 2015 when we saw all that film of people coming into European Union countries. That was from outside the European Union. But to the public, these things are important, and they worry that the people who are coming in may be criminals. They might be rapists or murderers, and on a couple of occasions they were. That shouldn't happen, by the way. We're entitled to turn them back at the border.
But to control net migration, would you have to leave the single market? Because David Davis, the Brexit Secretary, as you know, said today that we'd consider paying into the EU budget to retain single market access.
I think we would. I think if... well, that's another question. I think actually David Davis is right to answer in that way, but that's a different answer to the question that was raised. I think if the rest of the European Union recognise that free movement a la Treaty of Rome 1958, 6 member states, is a bit different now, it's 28 member states, and that there are issues right across Europe, in France, in the Netherlands, where they have elections in March, France in the summer, Germany next September or October, Deutschland Alternative are set up as an organisation that's specifically talking about free movement. I think if the rest of the European Union decided at some stage that they were going to have to rethink free movement, not to change the treaty, to make it clear it's about seeking work. If you haven't got work, the rules in this country are you go back after 6 months, never enforced. That it's not, once you commit crimes, then that's the end of your right to free movement. If there was a change of heart there in the rest of the European Union, I think it might be a very different picture for whether the people of Britain wanted to stay or wanted to leave.
Richard Tice.
I mean, the reality is... Carl, the reality is immigration was the #1 concern of the British people up and down the country during the referendum campaign. We held rallies all over the place, and it constantly came up as the #1 concern. Not because we didn't want immigration. We've always had immigration. We've always welcomed it. Up until 2004, we had levels of around 50,000 a year, and it worked very well. The public services worked, businesses worked. We then had uncontrolled, chaotic immigration since then, and I think it is still the #1 concern. I think the big question now is actually, when we leave the European Union, from what date will we actually change the immigration rules? That's one of the things I think the government have got to get a grip on. and when they announce it, it'll have to be a retrospective date, because we're going to see a continued increase and surge in immigration until that's made clear.
Okay. Ruth Davidson, of course, you fought to remain, and after the vote you said, I want to stay in the single market, even if it means maintaining free movement of labour. Is that still your position?
Well, yeah, if there was another referendum tomorrow on the same terms as the one we had, I'd vote Remain again. I want to stay part of the single market. I don't come from means by any sort of change or manner of means. The reason that I was on the Remain side was because I grew up in a manufacturing household, and every plate of food put down in front of me and my sister was because my dad made stuff and sold it abroad. And the question that was put on the table to me was, do you want to stay part of the single market, make sure that we have businesses able to trade with other countries in a big market for free? And part of that, and the critical pro, is that there's freedom of movement as well as goods. And I thought, on balance, absolutely, I agree with that. And if the question was asked again tomorrow, I would. But the issue is we've had a referendum now. There was a decision, and 17.5 million people voted differently from me, and that makes me sad. But it does mean that a decision was taken as the country, and I'm a Democrat, and I'll respect that decision.
But you said all this after the referendum. You said it in July, didn't you, about wanting to stay in the single market, even if it meant immigration?
Yeah, and I think David Davis was absolutely right today when he said that if it was the best deal that we can get in terms of leaving, that he would consider, and it's one of the considerations, one of the many considerations on the table, that they would pay a kind of subscription, if that was the way in which the negotiations went, in order to have tariff-free trade with Europe. And I support that as one of the options on the table.
But are you alarmed at the net migration figures? Are you cool about net migration?
Well, I think that one of the things that we learned during the campaign, and Alan is absolutely right about this, is because in many ways much of immigration policy was decided somewhere else. It was decided in Brussels. We in this country didn't have the sort of conversations that we've needed to have for some time. And I think that's why the strength of feeling in many parts of the country caught a lot of us by surprise. And I think that is something, as we have very difficult conversations, but necessary conversations, as the decisions stop being made in Brussels and start being made in the United Kingdom, we have to have a really grown-up conversation about this, and we have to involve everybody in it. But I think what's important is we don't just talk about numbers, and we don't just talk about labour. We actually talk about families, contributions, and people as well. We've got to be human about this.
Okay. Carl Wiltshire, what do you make of what you've heard so far? You asked the question.
Well, to be honest with you, I'm a little bit confused, because throughout the whole referendum and the referendum and the debates, we were told leaving the EU means leaving the single market. And I understood that, and I'm sure everybody else understood that. Yet we're still debating whether to stay in the single market or not. And we all know to control immigration, you're going to have to come out of the single market. So we've got a handful of MPs, or a minority of MPs, who are willing to ignore the will of the British people to keep this argument alive about the single market when we all voted to leave, which I find, I'm disgusted, it's undemocratic. And please think
Laurie Penny, do you agree with him? It's undemocratic?
Well, the question was, can we stay in the single market whilst retaining, control over immigration and bringing immigration figures down and stopping people coming from the EU? And the simple answer to that is no, not unless we get some amazing deal from the EU, which the EU doesn't seem very inclined to give us right now. But I'd like to put it both to the panel and the audience. We seem to be talking about migration in terms of a crisis, and we seem to have collectively accepted that immigration is a terrible, terrible problem, the worst problem this country has. And have we not? Have we not? Have we not? So, I mean, immigration brings a great many benefits to the United Kingdom. Immigrants, they contribute. There's a net contribution to the UK from immigrants, and leaving the single market will be an enormous blow to our economy. That is what would cause a squeeze on jobs, on housing, on services.
Yeah.
Sorry?
But can you answer what Carl Wiltshire said? Carl, just explain what you were saying again to Laurie Penny.
It's just, what I'm saying is we're still having this argument about the single market. Mm-hmm. We voted for that on June the 23rd. Leave the EU, we leave the single market. We all knew that. Why are we still arguing about the single market? It's not about immigration. It's not saying we stop immigration, it's about controlling immigration. Mm-hmm. So we know what the numbers are coming in.
I'll come back to you. I'll come back to you. Tim Stanley, I'll come back to you.
For me, during the referendum, the immigration issue was never about being anti-immigration. It was about creating a system that controlled it, which would mean that that was good for migrants who wanted to come here, provide their skills and work, but also it would essentially settle the matter and create a social consensus that showed that there was a positive good to immigration because Britain was in charge of it and in control of it. Now, having said that, though, there's an air of unreality about this debate. It's true that Brexit is important to controlling that element of migration which comes from the EU. But something which is rarely discussed is the fact that more than a majority of migrants are non-EU. And it's within the government's control to stop that, and it doesn't. Why? Well, what it has done is it has raised, for instance, the amount of income you have to have before you move in. It has raised the number of skills you have to have. It has said that you have to prove you're coming to do a proper university course, etc., etc. And yet still, the number of non-EU migrants goes up.
Are you critical of that? Are you saying it in a critical way, or do you think it's because they want those people to come in?
I think the answer is because we have a skills shortage in this country. We do have to deal with the EU issue because you can't just have an open border, and especially with low-skilled workers, that means pressures on housing, it means pressures on wages, yes. But let's be realistic. In the long run, dealing with that is not the only solution. We also have to upskill and train our population so that we require less numbers of people from overseas.
But do you, just go back to Carl's question, do you believe that we've got to leave the single market if we're to control migration from the EU? In other words, it's a sine qua non of being in the single market that you have uncontrolled immigration.
It's not even a matter of personal belief, it is simply a fact.
What do you think, sir? You had your hand up there.
Does it help when the new president of the EU, the Prime Minister of Malta, turns round and says, we haven't got a cat in hell's chance of having a single market and free movement within Europe? How does that help any negotiations we're going to have?
Ruth?
Well, I think if we're talking elements of law, I think there is a misnomer that the single market is a binary choice. You're either in or you're out. Actually, there's gradations of access too. I happen to be of the belief that while many people voted to come out of the EU, while they voted to take control of borders, while they voted on any number of different issues, people didn't vote to intentionally make it harder for British businesses to do business. They didn't vote to make sure there was tariffs slapped on everything, and they didn't vote to try and get the worst deal possible. They wanted a government to then take their vote and then negotiate the best deal they could. And I think that making sure that you had the maximum amount of access that you can, and there's many different models that you can use, helps British business. And I want to make sure that people that are struggling in, whether it's Wakefield or Leeds or Edinburgh or Glasgow, to make ends meet, to hire extra workers, to get their stuff sold abroad, that they have the very best deal. And I think it's incumbent on the government to go out and get that deal for them.
Sarah Keel, can we hear from you? Because let's keep this debate going. Sarah?
I want to ask, why is Brexit taking so long?
Why is it taking so long? Richard Tice?
Well, because unfortunately there is a small band of metropolitan elite whinging Ramonas. And they are playing games with the democratic will of the people. They are damaging the national interest. They're damaging our negotiating position with the European Union, and they're damaging our global standing with other countries around the world who want to get on and negotiate new agreements with us. It's disgraceful. Unfortunately, we've got to go through this Supreme Court process. Unfortunately, the government will probably lose, but let's see what the judges say.
Are you saying there are people, you said there are people, metropolitan elite. Do you include the Prime Minister? Do you include the Cabinet in that? Who are you saying are part of this?
Look, I think we all know who they are. It's the Tony Blairs of this world. It's the Nick Cleggs.
They haven't
it's the
decided.
Do they have power?
They haven't decided.
Sorry, we've got a new Prime Minister and a new Cabinet. Anybody there trying to slow it down?
She didn't want this legal case. It's the people who brought the legal case.
Right.
We weren't expecting a legal case when we voted to leave. And let's be crystal clear, Ruth. In the government pamphlet that I hope people read because it cost £9 million of taxpayers' money, it made it crystal clear that our arrangements with the single market would change. On 3 separate points, occasions in the document, it said we were going to change our arrangements with the single market. And the single market is a really bad deal for Britain.
OK. Richard Tice says there's a conspiracy to prevent the will of the British people being interpreted politically properly. What do you say?
Tosh, the Prime Minister decided that we would not trigger Article 50 until next March. She's the Prime Minister. Unless she's one of this metropolitan elite, the Prime Minister and the Cabinet decided that. Now, why did they decided that on very good grounds, incidentally. Once we trigger Article 50, it runs for 2 years. We have no control over extending it. The other 27 member states decide whether there's an extension or not. Given the complexity of unpicking laws after 43 years of membership on 20 different separate issues, it's going to take some time. The only control we've got over the timing is at this end, to make sure we've got our ducks in a row, and I'm not sure Messrs Johnson, Fox and Davis help us in that respect, but to get our ducks in a row, she's put it back to next March so that we get the full value of 2 years. I actually think March is too early because nothing's going to happen on these negotiations till after the German elections in September, October, so we lose 6 months.
So you would delay, you would urge her to delay till the autumn?
This is not an issue about whether we leave the EU. It's about the process and negotiations to make sure Britain's got the best possible deal.
But you would wait a year or more, in fact, till the autumn?
I can't see anything happening until next October. I actually think from the way things are looking from various notes that weren't supposed to be photographed this week, that the government is all over the place. When they start these negotiations in the interests of our fishermen, the interests of our farmers, the interests of our people working in manufacturing industry, people whose jobs in Wakefield and everywhere across the country, we've got to get this right. We've got to leave on the right terms for Britain, and therefore that process has to be meaningful. And I think if she triggers it too early, she loses a lot of valuable time.
Sarah Keel, does that... Are you reconciled to the delay?
I think the delay is giving the other parts of the EU more chance to put up their ducks in a row to decide what they're going to do to prevent us getting what we want.
In other words, that we've given away part of the game by waiting. Tim Stanley, do you agree with that?
The EU is itself in difficulty. Everyone keeps on saying we don't know what we want. No one's quite sure what the EU wants. People keep on saying we don't know what's going to happen in Britain after Brexit. No one's quite sure what's going to happen in the EU in the next 3 months. We have an Italian referendum to deal with. We have a French presidential election to go through. So who we'll be negotiating with, it's not entirely clear right now.
Why is it taking so long?
Why is it taking so long? I agree with Alan. That is entirely in the hands of the government. This is the timetable that they have decided to set. My fear is that it will be exploited by those who want to delay and delay and delay. There is something disingenuous, I'm sorry, about saying that the people need to have a second vote on a vote they've already had, or saying that Parliament needs to discuss something which the people have already voted on, when it was clearly understood that Parliament and the government would enact what the people chose to do. It is right that the government wait to get the civil service, if nothing else, set up and ready to enter those negotiations. But I do hope and pray that's not exploited by people as an excuse to kick the can down the road.
So you're not reconciled to the delay at the moment. You'd like it to go faster.
No, I'm very happy.
No, you are happy.
I'm happy for it to begin in March, but my goodness, no later than that.
All right. Well, let's see if our audience agrees. You sit with the spectacles on the gangway there, and I come to you.
First of all, I think Britain's Brexit vote has actually caused a lot of the disruption within Europe. We've set the ball rolling, we've pulled the skids from under it. David Cameron trolled his way around Europe trying to get some benefit for the country, came back with diddly squat, and consequently, there was an outvote. Now, Europe wasn't expecting it. I don't think this country was expecting it because there doesn't seem to be a whole lot of plan for the country at the moment, and things have got to take a natural course. You can't just come out and leave everything up in the air so that nobody knows what the heck's going on. It's got to happen in a
Britain had nothing to do. Britain did not cause the Eurozone crisis. Britain did not spark the rise of fascism in France. Britain is reacting to European chaos, not the other way around.
You, sir.
I personally would like to see us come out without even bothering to trigger Article 50. The whole rotten house of cards is about to fall. We've gone before that happens. The Italians will join us. The Dutch will join us. We've started a massive ball rolling which will ultimately destroy the European socialist dream. I am very pleased about that. but I'm also very angry with politicians on both sides of the aisle that hold the British electorate in contempt. That is happening on a daily basis. So we voted to go out, get us out.
Ruth Davidson.
Well, look, Theresa May says she's going to move this by March. She wants to make sure that we do it in good order so that we get things right for all of the different areas that are trying to speak to her. Now, I think Alan has been a little bit disingenuous today by saying that he would leave it a bit later. His party leader, Jeremy Corbyn, said it should be the day after, and then he changed his mind. He also said that, you know, it looks as if the UK government is running around doing lots of different things. Well, actually, people are saying that they want to make sure that financial services are looked after, that manufacturing is looked after, that fishing is looked after, that farming is looked after. It's right that the UK government is spending this time listening to all of these people, trying to unpick what it is that they want from this deal so that they can go into bat with the best possible hand. You can't, you know, no, David, it's important. You can't lay your hand out first and then listen to people after. You've got to listen to them now and get all your ducks in a row so that when we go into that room and we're sitting at a table, across the table from 27 other people that all want a piece of us, we've got our strongest team in the room, we know exactly what we're asking for, we know what we're going after, and we know the deals that we want for the people of this country. That's what we need to do.
So there is no plan at the moment?
Well, what we're doing is making sure that we've got the negotiators in place, that we know exactly what it is that we're asking for, we know what it is that we're willing to give away, that we know what the red lines are going to be, so that we can get the best deal for all of these different sectors. Because people didn't vote to make themselves intentionally poorer. They voted so that the UK government would do what they said, get us out of the EU. Now, I didn't want that, but I'm a Democrat and I respect it. We're leaving the EU, but we want to do it with a good deal, not having France and Germany and Italy taking big chunks out of us when we leave.
I'll just come back to you. You've heard
At the end of the day, I genuinely believe, strongly believe, that they need us more than we need them. We are net contributors.
All right.
We also have a massive market in the Commonwealth, United States, China, India, all want to deal with us.
Exactly.
I'm not that bothered about someone in Lithuania that wants to buy a pack of batteries.
OK, you, sir. Yeah, and then I'll come to you, too.
It was mentioned at the beginning that there's been an increase in migrants. The problem is, also mentioned by you, there is now going to be a surge. The longer it takes for a decision to be made, the more opportunity for more people to come into the country and increase the net migration numbers. That is not going to help because we've had 12 years already. It could be another 5 years.
All right. Laura Ben, do you agree with him?
Well, again, we're back to the issue of whether net migration needs to urgently be brought down. The fact is, look, there is a lot of uncertainty in this room. There's a lot of uncertainty in the country, and I get it. Like, part of me really does want an answer soon. I'd like to know what my future's going to look like, what my friends' futures are going to look like, my friends from the EU who are living here. I would like to know what's going to happen. Everyone would. But Brexit was a giant, giant shock. Almost nobody in government was really expecting it, and there was no plan beforehand. The people on the Brexit side really were not honest with the British people about what we were going to get.
No, that's...
You know, where's that 350 million a day for the NHS? Can I finish? Can I finish? Can I finish? And democracy is a process. Look, I understand people have really strong feelings on either side, and I do too, right? But democracy is not just about one side beats up the other and then one side has to lie down and the other person gets everyone. This was a narrow victory, 48% to 52.
But Laura...
May I finish?
No,
Please, may I finish? What that means is we need
stick
compromise.
to the point that he was making and the question that was raised. No, but...
It will continue to keep going up until somebody says, right, let's control it. Why can't they at least start that ball rolling?
Well, because we haven't left the single market yet.
No, but his
we
point...
know we're going to leave the European Union, so...
You get his point, that if you're talking about immigration, you'll get an accelerated, you get a surge of immigration before the deadline when we leave.
Well, that may well happen.
It is happening.
And people on the Brexit side should maybe have foreseen that.
But it's so easy to deal with.
Right,
you just set a retrospective date, and logic dictates that date is the 23rd of June. And everybody knows where they stand. All of these issues are about certainty. You know, it's the certainty of people in the room, but also the business community, many of whom voted Remain. They just now actually want us to get on with it. I think actually most Remainers, the vast majority of Remainers, saying, OK, we lost. But we're Democrats, now let's get on with it. Let's have some certainty, get Article 50 served, and 2 years plus 1 day, we're out, with or without a deal. We don't have to have a deal with the EU 27. Most great trading nations do not have a free trade agreement with the European Union. Let's try for a deal, but if we can't get one in 2 years, we're leaving. Done.
Okay. I want to hear some... I want to hear some... I'll take you. I want to hear some members of our audience. There are a lot of hands up. Yes, Sion.
I think we talk about immigration and all these things as if we're talking about some kind of infection. What happened to being actually humane, you know? When England needed migrants after the war, these migrants were welcomed. These people are leaving their homes, their families, not because, you know, they see gold in England, it's because they can't live in those countries. So if we do not want these people to be in England, why not join the same forces that we join in with so much, you know, rage to help them so they can stay in their country? That way, they won't come to this country and take the things that everybody seems to think that they're going to take away from England.
Okay. I'm really, really glad someone brought this up, because I'm really shocked at the tone of this debate and how we're talking about immigrants as if somehow they're not real people. The people who came over after the war, my family were part of that wave of people. I'm proud to be British and part of the European community, part of, you know, a giant society of people trying to work to make each other's countries better. I think, you know, we seem to have forgotten that Britain is also supposed, I hope, to be a compassionate nation, a humane nation. That is the Britain I'm proud of, and I want that country back. People were saying they want their country back. I want the tolerant, compassionate Britain back, and I'm worried that we're losing it.
Okay. You, sir. Yes, you, sir.
I wish the Remainers, and when I say Remainers, I don't mean everybody that voted to remain. Correct. But the Remainers would realise that every speed bump or delaying tactic that they employ, like Gina Miller and high-powered people, we're going to have a vote in Parliament, we're going to leave. All it does is strengthen the Europeans' hand. And if I were on the negotiating team for Europe, I would sit there and look and know that they're disunited, and I will get a better deal for Europe than Britain will be able to get from them. If they saw a united front, they would have to deal more seriously with us, and we would get a better deal.
Alan, briefly.
Two quick points. First of all, the reason why that 333,000 net migration figure and 335,000 today was so damaging to the Remain side is that leading the Remain side was the Prime Minister who promised to bring net migration down to the tens of thousands, and there suddenly it was at record levels. So Mr Cameron's involvement in this, I think, has been pernicious. The second point is, can you imagine if the referendum had gone the other way? UKIP were already, Nigel Farage, when he thought he'd lost and conceded defeat, said, of course, we're going to push now for another referendum. Can you imagine that if it had gone the other way, that UKIP and others would be saying, oh, well, we'll leave that, that's a settled issue now, that's the will of the people. They'd be campaigning all over again, just as they did after the referendum in 75. Good luck to them. But that's what works for them works for the Remain side as well.
So you want another referendum?
No, I don't. I don't. But that was what Nigel Farage was calling for.
But you don't go as
when
long
he thought he'd lost.
All right. You, sir, in blue there on the spectacles.
I just like to say that I just don't like the language that's being used, really. It's just like the words lectures, bemoaners, or whinging, or, you know, these labels that we're saying. These are Nick Clegg, these are people who are generally concerned about our country, and they're raising legitimate concerns about our future economy, about immigration. And I think we just have to step back and think a lot more about this. Look, I work as a doctor in oncology at my local hospital, and there's a £22 billion black hole in the NHS. Yep. My sister approached me in the ward, and she said to me that I'm struggling. She started crying in front of me. There's not enough staff. She's lost a third of her experienced staff. And what they're doing, they're pulling up staff that are not experienced from other departments. And these people, these staff, they've got the heart, they've got the will, but they just don't have that experience to work in this specialist field. And, you know, this is just going to get worse if we're going to embark on a process that could, and a lot of educated economists are saying, in the short to long term, will cause problems in our economy, which will lose money.
But there are those, and we heard one or two voices here, and Christy Ridey, I think, is one of them. Christy, just let's have your question and see whether you strike a chord with everybody here.
We knew what we voted for in leaving the EU. Why are Remainers making out constantly that we are uneducated people that didn't understand Brexit and what we were doing?
And obviously that's what you feel.
Yes.
You feel it. Do you feel it of Ruth Davidson?
I actually felt it. No, I don't actually.
Thank you.
I felt it more from Tim Farron last week, actually. I was sort of shouting at the TV. I'm not an uneducated person. I'm sure a lot of the people who voted to leave, we knew. I read everything. I looked into everything. It's how I felt, and I did the old-fashioned pros and cons in writing, and I wanted to leave. But people now are making out as if we're uneducated, as if we don't know what we were doing. And I just think they need to stop doing that.
Anybody else who feels that? Incidentally, throwing things at the television or shouting at it is an occupational hazard of watching Question Time. Yes, the woman up there on in the middle, in grey. Yeah.
I'm married to a German, and he was very upset when we came out of the EU. I voted to come out. Caused a few friction at first, but we've gotten over it. And I believe that we were treated by certain people, as this lady said, Christy, as uneducated, stupid northerners that didn't know that we're all racists up here and we don't know what we're doing and we don't realise what we've voted for. I work with Italians, I work with Polish, I'm married to a German. We didn't vote to get rid of people that because of where they came from. We voted to get out of the EU for completely different reasons.
And it's worth saying, because here in Wakefield the vote was
67%.
60, two-thirds, yes. Two-thirds voted out. You, sir, the man behind, do you agree with her?
I do indeed. Can I take exception, firstly, in the implication from Laurie that it was a close-run thing? Had it been a general election, it would have been called a landslide. So can we put that one to bed? We can all see that there is a storm brewing in Europe, and it's time any sensible skipper would head for home.
Yes.
We need to get out now. We need to shake the dice, see where they land, but we need to shake the dice, and we need to be in control of it.
All right. I'll take a couple of points, now we might go on. You, sir, there. Yes.
Yeah, I'm one of those people. I find it absolutely abhorrent that people like you come on the end and call that the British people, we lack compassion. You're essentially calling us fascist and racist just because we have concerns about immigration. I'm a primary school teacher and I've worked at various schools where... Yes, but unfortunately that's exactly the tone that we're taking. I've worked at various schools where English is genuinely not the first language on the playground. Not between the children, but by the parents. Quite often, you go around, because once upon a time, people came to this country and gradually integrated and were welcomed. We're a very welcoming nation. But when you get a massive influx of people all coming at the same time, that's what people have a problem with. That's when we get concerned when we go to the doctors and we can't get appointments. You go down to A&E and it's full. Now, people may turn around and say, no, that's racist, that's fascist, that's not acceptable. But 18 million people, just like that lady says down there, we knew what we were voting for, we know what we want to get out, and the sooner we start in trigger Article 50, the better.
All right. Laurie? Laurie first. No, you go first. Laurie, keep it short, so we must move on.
All right. To try and answer both of your questions, look, firstly, I don't believe that people who voted Brexit are stupid. I think, unfortunately, some people may have been lied to and manipulated, and that is not the fault. Excuse me. If you let me finish, I'd like to ask you, sir, what is... I understand that it hurts to hear people saying that's racist, that's xenophobic, but do you know what also hurts? Is to be a victim of racism, to be a victim of anti-immigration violence. Let me put it to you. In Wakefield here, 95% of the people of Wakefield were born in the UK. This is not a town which is experiencing a giant migration crisis. And I want to know from you, sir. I'd like to know what it is about listening to people speak a different language in the playground that makes you uncomfortable, and how you think that connects to the fact that you can't get a doctor's appointment because the NHS has a funding crisis that has nothing to do with that.
All right, Laurie, you've made your point. Let him answer, then I'll come to you, and then I'll come to you, Tim. Yes.
OK, the main problem, to be honest with you, there's various different accents, there's various different languages that we hear. But what you do find is that it fires up different parents, and all of a sudden the parents are complaining, and then the children, who weren't aware really of where different children came from, all of a sudden are becoming quite divisive, because the parents are becoming... Now, as I say, once upon a time, people came to this country. It's a fantastic country. We welcome people. We integrate with people. But unfortunately, when people come en masse, they don't necessarily want to integrate with everybody else because they've got their own little communities, and that's what we're finding in school playgrounds.
All right. You, sir, with the beard there in the middle.
Well, speaking as a 23-year-old, I was, one of these so-called millennials. I was kind of embarrassed, actually, to be amongst my peer group in the wake of the results, as there was quite a lot of somewhat fascist opinions from the Remainers, especially people amongst my age. People saying...
From Remainers?
Yeah, from the not all, just a select few.
You voted out?
Yes.
Yeah.
People saying stuff, rather fascist things like, oh, we should not let the old vote because they all voted to leave and they've ruined our future. You know, people suggest some kind of Logan's Run-esque scenario, which is quite, which I think is quite appalling. I mean, the worst I saw was the response from people who went to Glastonbury. You know, the epitome of British privilege, probably, where you had all these middle, upper-class people saying, "Ow, the chavs have won."
Okay.
I thought that was quite patronising.
You made the point. Other Remainers here who feel that it's wrong to say that you voted in the way that has been described because you thought people were stupid and ignorant and all the rest of it. Are there any Remainers in our audience who'd like just to say, yes, you, madam?
I think people voted the way they voted because they were given certain information. I don't think the information was correct on either side. I'd like to ask Christy if she believed that the NHS was going to get an extra £350 million a year.
Christy?
No.
What? You didn't?
No.
What about you, here on the right?
I mean, I voted Remain, and I suppose I voted Remain probably 55–60% Remain and 40% wanting there to be a change. Mm-hmm. And what I feel, I'm just saddened by the tone of this debate.
The debate here on Question Time, or the debate in the country, or the debate in Wakefield?
I think the first thing I would say, the debate during the referendum itself was appalling. The issues were not discussed in any useful, informative way at all, I felt. So that's the first thing I would say. And then, I certainly don't feel that people who voted not to Remain are unintelligent or anything else. And it's quite upsetting to hear that this evening.
I just want to say to that lady as well, I'm a Remainer, and I've never once said to anybody who voted Leave that you're unintelligent, that you're uneducated, that you didn't engage in the debate. And I think there's fault on both sides to continue to label each other as Remainers or Exeters.
Absolutely. You say. Yes.
We talk about honesty in the campaigns. I think both sides were guilty. I'm still waiting for my house price to fall 10% and for the punishment budget.
Well, we're not out of the EU yet.
Well, okay. I mean, the punishment budget was supposed to be the day after. The day after we leave the EU, we were promised a punishment budget.
The panel have been listening to you intently, so let's hear from one of you.
Some of these together. First of all, from the lady over here that is worried about the tone of this. In Scotland, we have a bit of a history of referendums in the recent past. And, do you know, one thing that we found is that if you have a binary choice, you divide people into two camps. And the echoes of that last a long time unless there is a public will for people to reach across that divide. And I think that it is unfortunate that we're seeing in some senses now with the Brexit vote what we already saw in Scotland a couple of years ago. And what I'd say to Chrissy, and I'm really pleased that she doesn't think that as somebody who says that I voted Remain, if there was another decision tomorrow, I would still vote the same way as I did, that I'm pretending that you are in some way didn't make your choice in as informed a way as I did, because I believe that you did. Now, I would have liked a longer campaign, but what I do say is the way that we get past this is that we all try to work together. So we are leaving the EU. Now, one of the things that wasn't on the ballot paper is what that necessarily looks like in all the details. But what I would say is, we've been a member of this club for 43 years. We're about to pick up our stuff and leave. I think it's incumbent on both Remainers and Leavers to get behind the UK government so that we try and get the best deal as we get out the door.
Okay. We'll move on. We'll move on. But Richard Tice, a last word to you, because it was you who said you thought there was a conspiracy by government to delay this. You stand for leave means leave, and you're probably with him want to get out.
Let's be clear. I didn't say it was a conspiracy by government. I said it was a conspiracy by a small group of Remoaners. But I think the debate's very interesting. The way to show proper compassion and that we are a decent society is to take people's lives off this negotiating table. I urge the government to say that all of those who've come here under the rules, the EU nationals, are very welcome, and we should adopt the moral high ground. And frankly, if the EU 27 want to adopt what I call the immoral low ground, then it actually tells us quite a lot about them, doesn't it?
Okay. All right. Go on, then. You can.
I just want to make a point about this. Listen, the other 27 member states, we are a non-EU country now. Each one of those 27 member states decides who. Each one of those member states decides who comes into their country. The majority of EU people here are Polish, and the majority of Brits abroad are in Spain. Angela Merkel can't say that Spain and Poland can reach these agreements. If we're out of the EU, then we are entitled to say who comes into our country, and they are entitled to say who comes in from non-EU countries. So it's ludicrous to suggest they're taking the low moral ground because they don't give a blanket acceptance that anyone from Britain can stay anywhere in the EU.
Okay. We're there under the existing rules, that's the point.
All right, I think we must go. We've only got 20 minutes left of this programme, we better carry on. Just to say, we're going to be in Maidenhead next week. And actually, that's the last programme until Christmas. And then in January, we're in Solihull. So Maidenhead and then Solihull. Come and join the audience. The address is there. But let's go on to another question. Let's have this one from Glenn Gilfeather, please.
Is the Labour Party under serious threat in the Northern Heartlands after the election of Paul Nuttall as UKIP leader?
Paul Nuttall, who was elected with over 60% of the vote in UKIP, is he a real threat to Labour? Tim Stanley.
Yes, I think he probably is. It's extraordinary, isn't it? UKIP ought to have disappeared by now. Well, it should have done. I'm sorry.
Why so?
It is counterintuitive to use a French phrase when discussing UKIP, but their raison d'être has disparu overnight because they won the referendum, and surely, therefore, they should have folded. Moreover, since then, their existential crisis has been reflected in the fact that they've had 3 leaders in almost as many months, and their past leader has given up so much from British politics that he's done what a lot of good migrants do and has moved abroad in search of new work.
Yeah.
So you'd imagine UKIP. So why is it that in all these polls, UKIP clings on to 12 to 13%? And the answer is because UKIP has evolved and it is benefiting from Labour's troubles. UKIP is no longer a one-issue party. It has now tapped into a reservoir of economic and cultural dissent which Labour cannot tap into. Why? Because Labour has retreated into its Islington heartlands. It is essentially a central London party now, and it no longer not only addresses the material issues that directly affect many people in different parts of the country, but it also, more importantly, doesn't talk their language, sound, or look like them. And in the contest of weirdness, UKIP oddly just about wins. And I genuinely think that Paul Nuttall, who is a charismatic, intelligent man, I do think he has the capacity to exploit that. And so I would say to Alan, I'm sure you loathe UKIP. If you do, it's in your power to stop it. Get rid of Jeremy Corbyn.
There's your challenge, Alan.
Just been re-elected. I've got a funny feeling that Nigel Farage hasn't gone for good. I heard someone describe him as like political herpes. No matter what you try and do, he comes back within 6 months' time. So Paul might not be there for long. And they've been through so many leaders in such a short period of time. Listen, Labour Party should never be complacent. We've got no God-given right to represent seats like Wakefield or Hull or other areas. But I tell you what, when UKIP have done half of the things that Labour Party has done, creating the NHS, introducing the Open University, introducing the Education Maintenance Allowance, introducing Sure Start centres, when they've done half of that, then they might be able to boast they've done something for the working class. At the moment, Paul Nuttall, just like his mentor Nigel Farage, thinks there should be an insurance-based system. We should get rid of the NHS. He's anti-abortion. He believes very strongly that in conservative values. He stood as a Conservative councillor. And the test for Paul Nuttall, he comes from Bootle in Liverpool. He stood in the 2015 election in his own hometown at a time when Joe Benton, a great friend of mine, had been the MP there for 35 years, was stepping down. Couldn't have been a more propitious time for this hero of the working class. In his own town, amongst his own people, he got 11% of the vote. Don't overblow the Paul Nuttall phenomenon.
But let's turn to Labour's problems, which Tim talked about, and you've talked about Corbyn not being a man who can win the general election. What are you going to do about the Labour Party to meet this challenge?
Well, I said that at a time there was a leadership election, and the leadership election was settled. I don't want to make Labour not being a party of power a self-fulfilling prophecy. It's not in my interest or anyone else in the Labour Party to do that. So, the Labour Party is more than just one person. I hope Jeremy Corbyn can lead us to victory, because I think for the country, it's the only alternative. If UKIP have picked up on anything, incidentally, we had a UKIP councillor in Hull. He resigned to join the Labour Party. We won't accept him. But what they have picked up on is the collapse of the Lib Dem vote in places like Wakefield and Hull. They were the second party.
That's true.
Then they went into coalition government, and then they disappeared. Someone's going to have to come second, and UKIP capitalised on it.
The most confused people in the world are Lib Dem voters. So 1 minute they're for the Liberals, next minute they're for UKIP.
For UKIP,
yeah. Laurie Penny, do you think Jeremy Corbyn can win for Labour?
Well,
and UKIP isn't a threat?
Do I think Corbyn can win and UKIP isn't a threat? I think UKIP is a huge threat, not just to Labour, but to the entire country, and it shouldn't be underestimated. And one thing UKIP are very, very good at is exploiting the real fear and the real urgency all over the country, which mainstream political parties really don't seem to be addressing. I mean, here in Wakefield, there have been 40% cuts to the council budget since 2010. That's huge. You know, hospitals are closing. Huddersfield Hospital is closing. It's there's a huge fight to say that. Meanwhile, we've been talking about immigration for the last hour. These are the material issues that are really affecting people on the ground. Nobody in government seems to be or in the opposition seems to be standing up and making a case for saving these things and protecting social democracy,
And
protecting welfare.
UKIP, you said, is the real threat to this country, though Mr Nuttall says he's the patriotic voice of working people.
Well, it's not the only real threat to this country. I think there are a lot of things to worry about right now in British politics, but I don't think there is just one form of patriotism. I certainly don't think that a man who stands so strongly against women's rights, a man who is determined to divide us along cultural lines. He's now starting an argument over banning the burqa, as if that is the #1 political priority right now. He doesn't seem to be the kind of person who wants to unify the British working class or any British people. What we need right now is some kind of ability to sit in a room together and make decisions, make compromises. UKIP just want to get attention, get power for themselves by exploiting on people's real fear, real anger. And I think that is offensive. It's offensive to the British people.
And Richard Tice, you've funded UKIP. So do you still support UKIP?
Look, I'm cause-based. I'm not tribal party-based. You know, my cause for many years has been to leave the European Union, and I'm delighted that UKIP has played a massive role in that. But no party, whether it's UKIP, Labour or indeed the Tories, as Alan said, should be complacent, nor has a right to exist permanently in the future. But what we do need is a credible opposition that actually holds any governing party to account, because otherwise you end up with poor government. So I think it's vital that actually both of them continue to make real progress and get their houses.
Are you still a supporter of UKIP, and do you think the Labour Party is under threat with Paul Nuttall
As I said,
in the north?
I'm cause-based. I'm a meritocrat.
Well, there's a cause base.
I look
is
at,
UKIP your
when
cause?
when we come to an election, I'll look at which party I think is going to do the best job for governing the country.
At the moment, what's your view?
At the moment...
If Paul Nuttall comes to you and said, I'd like £1 million, would you give it him? At
the moment, I'm supporting the Prime Minister doing what the democratic will of the people said, which is to take us out of the European Union.
OK. Yes.
Politics is a lot about momentum, as I'm sure you're all aware. And I think the Labour Party's real mistake was in the wake of the EU referendum, when the Conservatives didn't have a leader, when they were about to go through a leadership election, not backing their own leadership. Whether they did fully support it or not, a fully united Labour Party would look so much stronger in these past 6 months than the Conservative Party, and who knows where that could have gone after that.
OK. Ruth Davidson.
Well, look, I admire Alan Johnson. I respect him. If he was the leader of the Labour Party right now, I might be a little bit worried. But I think he is being breathtakingly complacent if he thinks that UKIP is not a threat to the Labour Party in the Northern Heartland. And I'll tell you why. Because the Labour Party used to have other heartlands too, and it used to be called Scotland. And at the last general election, they lost 40 out of their 41 seats, and they didn't see it coming. They've just lost in this Scottish election that we had in May. They dropped to the 3rd place in Scotland for the first time in more than 65 years. There was a poll in Scotland yesterday. Jeremy Corbyn polled net -35 and net -5 among Labour voters in Scotland. Now, Scotland in the recent history has had titans of Labour. Robin Cook, John Smith, Gordon Brown. Now, I don't agree with them, but they were big figures, and they were swept away, and the party was swept away. And that sort of complacency, we'll see it happen in the north of England too, if Labour doesn't work out what it's for. Because I tell you one thing, Leeds and Bradford and Sunderland and Middlesbrough feel just as far from Islington as Dundee and Glasgow and Airdrie and Shropshire.
Yeah. OK, well, we've been talking about, and Laurie Penny touched on government spending and all of that. Let's just end, because we're in Wakefield, with a question that's going to affect you all here. From Tarina Sykes, please.
Is it worth the £63 billion it will cost to build the HS2, and how long will it take to pay for itself?
Because we now know that this thing has been confirmed, and it seems to be running over budget, as these things do. Laurie Penny, you in favour of HS2?
Well, look, the infrastructure projects are going to be vital for the next 10, 20 years of development in Britain. We certainly need to be investing in big projects right now. I think what the concern has to be for people who live locally, and I mean, correct me if I'm wrong, because I don't live locally, but it's whether people who will be displaced and whose lives will be really affected by this are going to get adequate compensation, are going to have help to move. And I think, that's what the business of government has to be about.
Well, we can
it's
ask
about
her.
compromise.
What do you think?
Well, they're not getting the compensation, and, well, I don't think that you can ever justify spending £63 billion on a transport system. What's going to save an hour of a journey, if that?
Yes.
The woman in... The woman there in red up there at the back. Are you in favour of it? No, with red hair too, yes.
I just don't really understand what the benefit of shaving 20 minutes off the journey time to London is going to actually do for the north of England.
Okay. And is anybody in favour here in the audience of it? Yes, you, sir. Yes.
Yes, it's essential that we invest in infrastructure. It'll create jobs. It'll promote growth and boost of the economy in the north.
Okay,
but we have plenty of infrastructure that already...
That's absolutely right, but sadly, global precedent always shows that if you build a fast railway service to the capital city, all you do is accelerate the people who go to the capital city. We need to do exactly the opposite.
But it's essential...
It should be stopped, and the money should be spent up here. It's rare I agree with George Osborne, but it should be spent on the Northern Powerhouse.
Would you rather borrow money that's cheap and just give it away in quantitative easing?
Helicopter
no, I would spend it on
the woman there at the very back, yes. You.
Yeah, you can get from Wakefield to London in 2 hours, yet last week and last month and the month before that, it typically takes me 3 hours to get to Liverpool. Shouldn't we be thinking about
exactly.
M62?
Please, Stanley. keep it short. We've got a couple of minutes.
HS2 is a white elephant on wheels. Apparently it's not on wheels.
Is it not on wheels?
It's on wheels. Right, OK. Well, it should get some wheels first. We're going to spend 60 billion. I expect it to be on wheels.
What does it mean? What do you mean? Seriously, what do you mean when you say it's a white elephant?
It has already doubled in its price. It is only going to shave a few minutes off the journeys. By the time the damn thing is built, it'll already be out of date in technological terms. We have a massive rail infrastructure which desperately needs investment. There is an infamous train in the part of the world where I've come from which has literally, in its existence, never once been on time. There are things that need to be done. We should not be pouring money into these grandiose, vain projects which politicians just love to crack a bottle of champagne over.
Ruth Davidson?
I'm not sure the Hogwarts Express is really making the point for you, but I think my problem is that when everyone's talking about this north-south divide, I've just got in a car and driven for 4.5 hours south to get here. So in terms of what HS2 does for areas even further north than Wakefield, actually it doesn't do very much. I agree with the gentleman at the back that we need investment in infrastructure, but what I want is something that gives me the biggest bang for my buck, and I'm not sure that HS2 does that.
So if you were leading the Conservative Party, it might not be going ahead.
What's that?
I said if you were leading the Conservative Party, it might not be going ahead. You, sir, there, you had your hand up.
Thank
yes.
you.
Briefly, if you would, I want to bring Alan in before we
All
start.
of this talk about saving time is an absolute misnomer.
Yes.
We're sat in Wakefield. It's going to disrupt people in Wakefield. And guess what? It won't stop here. We can't get on the train here. We have to go to Leeds. So it will actually take longer to get to London from Wakefield than it does today.
Alan. Alan Johnson, very briefly, is this unstoppable now? Is it going to happen?
I supported this when I was in Cabinet, when Labour made the decision, and the Conservatives opposed it. Now they've looked at this and decided to do it. And I think it's a very good reason. It's not about shaving time, it's about capacity on the railways. You go to any other country in Europe, you'll see they invested and they made sure that they had the capacity for the growing numbers who want to use the railways. We put it off again, and it's been put off at least 4 times in the last 30 years. It's going to be more expensive. It costs the same, incidentally, as Crossrail does in London, which is going ahead to put more infrastructure into London. We need more of it in the north, and we should start it from the north, not from the south. It should start, or at least from both ends together.
Glasgow,
so we get the jobs
Edinburgh,
up here
please,
first.
her?
Yes, absolutely. That's where it links into.
So you'd like to start in Edinburgh or Glasgow and come down?
Yes.
OK. Well, you didn't argue for that in Cabinet.
How do you know? You weren't there.
Well, did you? Did you?
I might have done.
You might have done. Pigs might fly. All right, our time's up. We better stop now. Otherwise, we'll be done by whoever follows. We're in Maidenhead next week. On our panel next week, we've got Nigel Farage. And is that a groan because he wasn't here, or because you don't want to? All right. And Will Self and Louise Mensch. And then we're off, as I said earlier on, over Christmas. We're going to be in Solihull for the first programme in January. So come to Maidenhead and hear Nigel Farage back on form, or come to Solihull after Christmas. You can apply at our website or on our telephone number 0330 123 9988. And as you know, if you're listening to all of this on Radio 5 Live, the debate will carry on Question Time, Extra Time. But here, my thanks to all of you who came onto this panel and to all of you who came to take part in the programme in Wakefield. Until next Thursday, from Question Time, good night.
Ed Balls and Arlene Phillips. Are we in for a tango? This week follows next here on BBC One.
We are defiant. We are resilient. We are influential. We are creative.
We are pioneering.
We are storytellers.